Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Orphan Train Trials by Rachel Wesson, narrated by Ruth, Urquhart. Chapter 1. 46th Street, New York, April, 1894. Kathleen Collins read the letter from her sister Bridget, greedily consuming all her news. "Has Bridget listened to our advice to stay away from New York?" Kathleen looked up at Lily's question. She hated upsetting this kind woman who had done so much to help her family. She shook her head. "She says they will be here in about 2 weeks. First they are going to visit Dr. Powell and his wife, the people who adopted Sally. I wonder if they were able to help Sally's limp. She was such a lovely, happy child with her beautiful smile." Lily sighed, causing Kathleen to look up in concern. "Kathleen, I admit to being torn. I am looking forward to seeing your sister again and congratulating her on her marriage, but I don't want to place her in danger." "Lily, it's been almost a year since we left the factory. Surely Mr. Oakes will have forgotten about Bridget by now. He should have other things on his mind with the financial crash." Lily smiled sadly. "You would think so, especially with over 16,000 businesses folding. Charlie said 1 in 6 men is now out of work. But somehow, Mr. Oakes and his ilk tend to survive, perhaps thrive in difficult times like these. I heard from Inspector Pascal Griffin. Oakes is a man who never forgets, especially someone like Bridget." Kathleen exchanged a glance with her friend Bella. They knew how difficult life was in New York, with the increased unemployment meaning more visitors to the sanctuary. Still, she hoped Inspector Griffin was wrong, although he wouldn't have gotten to such a senior level in the police force if he wasn't usually correct in these matters. She was dying to see Bridget, and she missed her and Annie and Liam. She also wanted to get to know her new brother-in-law better. Having only met him briefly when Annie and Liam joined the Orphan Train, she couldn't help but wonder what her vivacious older sister saw in such a stern, sad man. Yet Bridget was happy, more than happy. Her letters flowed with joy over her new role as an outplacement agent. Even when she wrote of the things that annoyed her, her tone was one of someone who believed in the work they were doing. She continually praised her husband, Carl. "Bridget won't be staying in New York for long, so she should be fine," Lily said, bending to reach the knitting by her chair. They were in her private sitting room, taking advantage of some quiet time. Charlie was away with work, and Lily had to wait for Minnie Mike or Tommy to collect her to escort her home. Charlie had left strict instructions on the care his wife was to receive. Lily joked that Charlie must think she was the first woman to have a child, but everyone knew he was just being careful. They had been married a long time, almost 5 years. "How is Inspector Griffin?" Kathleen asked in a bid to change the conversation away from Oakes and danger. "The papers are full of stories about how the New York Police Department needs to be cleaned up." "I think there are more criminals in the force than outside it," Bella said, not looking up from the sketch she was working on. Kathleen looked over her shoulder, trying to see the dress. Bella had a wonderful eye for detail. They used to take walks down to Fifth Avenue to view the dresses in the store windows. When they got back, Bella would take out her sketch pad and draw similar designs to those she had seen in the stores. She really was very clever. "Bella, that's not true," Lily reprimanded gently. Bella put her pencil down and looked Lily straight in the face. "Yes, it is, Lily. Every woman who comes here has a similar story about paying the police bribes, either in cash or favours." Bella's face turned various shades of pink, partly from anger at the injustices the women faced, and partly from embarrassment, Kathleen surmised. "Those men are supposed to protect everyone, but they don't care about the children in the tenements. They just lock them up." "Bella, I know you were upset about young Dylan and Sammy being arrested, but they were caught in the act," Kathleen said gently. "You can't blame the police for picking them up." "Can't I? Those kids had to do it. The gangs told them to. What would happen to them if they refused? The police are afraid of the Eastmans and the Five Pointers." The gangs ruled New York. That much was true, although there were police officers trying to fight back. But corruption was rife, and many law enforcers looked the other way, depending on which gang was involved. There were rumours the government was going to do something to sort out the corruption, but as yet, nothing much had happened. But there were still some police who wore their uniform with pride and served their community as best they could. Bella, that's unfair. Inspector Griffin was talking about that very thing when he called to check on us over the weekend. He said there are moves being made to get the gang situation under control, but in the meantime, we have to be patient, Lily said, her tired tone making Kathleen wish Minnie Mike or Tommy would come back to take Lily home. I'm sorry, Lily. Bella looked contrite. I just can't bear the sight of those kids in the cells. I know they act all tough, but putting children in with real criminals is just wrong. Bella pursed her lips together as she screwed her eyes shut. Not one tear escaped, but Kathleen had seen her friend's eyes fill up. She squeezed her arm, gently trying to show her she cared. Bella, you reminded me. I can't believe I forgot, Lily said, sitting straighter in the chair. Being pregnant is making me forgetful. Father Nelson spoke to me yesterday about a group of orphan children coming to us from a prison somewhere north of here, Lily explained. A prison? Kathleen clarified. Yes. It is bad enough when youngsters like Sammy or Dylan get picked up and thrown in a cell for a night, but these children have been living in the prison. Their only crime is that of being poor and orphaned. The local authorities maintain it's because the orphanages are overflowing. You don't believe them? Kathleen asked. Lily picked up the teapot and poured more tea into their cups. Lily sat back farther in her seat as if taking time to compose her thoughts. I believe the existing facilities are overcrowded, but that is not where the blame lies. Until our government views the needs of vulnerable children with the same importance as other issues, there will never be enough money or safe places for the people who need them most. Lily stopped talking, an apologetic look on her face. Forgive me, girls. Charlie tells me not to get on my soapbox. Nothing to apologize for, Kathleen said. I wish there were more people who think like you do, Lily. I feel so bad for those we left behind in the tenements. When Mam was alive, she used to share what we had with the families who lived around us, like Mrs. Fleming does. Speaking of Mrs. Fleming, would you like to come and visit her with me? Lily asked. I am going tomorrow night. Minnie, Mike and Tommy will be with us. I had a message to call on her last week, but as I had a chill, Charlie ordered me to bed. Yes, please, I would love to see her, Kathleen answered. Bella, would you like to come with us? Mrs. Fleming is such a lovely lady. Her husband, Dave, and children are nice too. They were very good to us when my mam died. Kathleen had been thrilled Bella had opened up so much and had become a close friend. She would never replace Bridget in her affections, but she had helped her through a very lonely time. She wanted Bella to meet Mrs. Fleming, who did so much work in the community, helping families to help themselves. Bella looked up from her sketching. Yes, please. That's settled then, Lily said, smiling at Bella. Kathleen knew Lily wanted to get Bella to be more trusting of people, to see that not everyone was as horrible as the people who had mistreated her when she was younger. Kathleen, can you ask Cook to bake a few more batches of cookies? They always disappear quickly. We'll need some blankets and some clothes as well. You know the drill by now, Lily said, smiling at Kathleen, making her feel warm inside. Since Bridget had left, Kathleen had gone out with Lily on her rounds visiting those families who couldn't or wouldn't come to the sanctuary. She couldn't say she enjoyed going back to the tenements. She didn't. There was no comparison between her current home and the overcrowded, wretched squalor in which she had once lived. She was so grateful Lily had taken her family in. I'll go now and get organised. Thank you, Lily. She stood and gathered the cups to take the tray with her. Bella stood to answer the door. They all recognised Tommy's knock.
Evening, ladies.
Tommy acknowledged them.
Are you ready to go home, Miss Lily?
Yes, thank you, Tommy. Lily beamed at her friend and protector. Wait, Kathleen, what about Maura? Would she like to come with us? Kathleen didn't look at Lily. but stared at a point above her head. Embarrassed at her sister's behaviour, she wasn't sure if Lily knew of the latest problems Maura had caused. Bella didn't make any comment. Kathleen thought it was loyal of her not to complain to Lily about how badly Maura had treated her, over the last month in particular. "Why don't you ask, Maura?" Lily asked, when Kathleen didn't respond. "She may find it good to get out of the sanctuary and back into the real world, if only for a few hours." Kathleen wasn't at all sure Maura would say yes, so she just kept quiet. Chapter 2. New York. Kathleen entered the bedroom she and Maura now shared. They had moved to the smaller space when the others had left for Riverside Springs. Her elder sister didn't glance at her as she came in, let alone say anything. Obviously she was in another one of her moods. "Are you going out again, Maura?" Kathleen asked, wondering how her sister funded all her trips. Although they had jobs in the sanctuary, the wages were quite low. "What's it to do with you? You're not my keeper." "I am going to see Mrs. Fleming with Lily and Bella tomorrow evening. I thought you might like to come with us." "No, thanks," Maura said, as she picked up her hat and purse and waltzed out the door. Kathleen was tempted to scream, but that wouldn't achieve anything. She bit her lip. Why was Maura so horrid? When David, her fiancé, had been alive, she'd been nicer. Not as nice as Bridget, but easier to live with. Now Maura refused to spend any time with her. She went out every evening saying she had to be somewhere. She didn't elaborate, and Kathleen didn't press her. Maura was an adult, and if she wanted to follow another path, it wasn't up to Kathleen to stop her, no matter how much she disapproved. Maura had become very friendly with one of the women, Patricia, who worked in the sewing section of the sanctuary. Kathleen, who liked most everyone, didn't like Patricia, and she took her temper out on Bella and the other girls. Bella was outspoken and difficult sometimes to warm to, but the girl had a kind heart. She didn't say anything hurtful about anyone and wasn't a gossip, unlike Patricia. That woman seemed to delight in telling the group of women stories of orphans being sent on trains to become slaves to their new owners. Kathleen had challenged her more than once, but Patricia insisted she was just repeating what she had read in the newspapers. Kathleen wished Bridget were here. Her sister was strong enough to put anyone, including Patricia Martin, back in her place. Kathleen didn't believe her stories. She couldn't afford to. She was worried enough about her siblings. Not Liam and Annie, who wrote regularly about their new home with Carolyn and Jeff Reese in Riverside Springs. They were happy. But she hadn't heard anything from her brothers, Shane and Michael. No one had. Lily had tried to find out more about where they had been placed, but she could only find information which suggested they were en route to Cedar Falls, Iowa. Chapter 3. New York. It was chilly the next evening, despite it being the end of April. Kathleen wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, wishing she had thought to bring her coat. A cab trundled by, hitting a puddle in the process and sending a shower of water over their small group. If it hadn't been for Mike's quick reflexes pulling Kathleen out of the way, she would have been soaked. She thanked the gentle giant with a warm smile, which made him blush. They could smell the tenement before they reached it. The stench of boiling cabbage, unwashed bodies, and decades of discarded filth fought for dominance. Bella's face was a picture. "I forget you never lived in the tenements, did you?" Kathleen asked her friend. Holding her nose in a most unladylike way, Bella shook her head, as if afraid to breathe in the air. Kathleen's stomach roiled too, but she fought hard to keep a smile on her face. She didn't want to offend her old neighbours, her friends who still lived in this vile place. Mrs. Fleming wasn't standing at her door to greet them as she usually did. A feeling of dread made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She moved closer to the door, but Lily laid a hand on her arm. "Maybe we are too early?" Lily asked. "Lily, you and I both know Mrs. Fleming is always ready an hour before we're due to arrive. Something is wrong." "Wait here and I will check," Lily said. "Not on your life. You need to watch out for yourself. You have someone else to think of now." Kathleen said gently, her eyes glancing to Lily's softly rounded stomach, barely visible under her open coat. "Bella, please stay with Lily. I will come back as soon as I can." Kathleen didn't wait for her friends to argue back. Her eyes met those of Mike's and he nodded slightly. He would stay with the ladies outside. Tommy followed Kathleen, and she didn't argue. She was glad of his support. She made her way deeper into the rooms, her heart beating so loudly she thought it would wake the dead. What was wrong? "Mrs. Fleming, it's Kathleen Collins. I came to—" Kathleen came to a standstill as the vision before her started to make sense. The Fleming family were gathered around the double bed, which had been dragged from its normal place against the wall to the centre of the room, nearer to the wood-burning stove. The room, normally so clean and tidy, was in disarray. The chairs were placed around the bed. Mrs. Fleming, pale and shrunken to a shadow of her former self, lay surrounded by her children. "Ma, it's Kathleen Collins. Remember her? She used to live next door," Colum Fleming said gently, bending down nearer his mother's ear. Kathleen caught Mr. Fleming's eye, his expression making the tears threaten to flow. She bent down beside the bed. "Mrs. Fleming, it's Kathleen Collins. Why didn't you send someone for me?" Kathleen asked, forgetting Lily had been sent for last week. "Ma said she wasn't sick enough. She seemed to be doing better than last week, but then yesterday she took a really bad turn. The doctor had to come," Jess said, her face white with shock and grief. Kathleen gave the 10-year-old a quick hug. Kathleen knew that families in these tenements didn't send for the doctor unless it was really serious. They couldn't afford his fees. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said there was nothing to be done. She will be gone by nightfall," Jess repeated tonelessly. Kathleen gaped at the child, who didn't appear to understand the harsh reality of the words she was repeating. Her eyes rose to meet those of Mr. Fleming, and she saw he agreed with the doctor's assessment. "Children, leave me be. I want to talk to Kathleen, alone." Mrs. Fleming took an age to get the one sentence out, punctuating each word with the cough. "You too, Dave." Kathleen waited for Dave Fleming to escort his children outside. Then she moved closer to her friend, taking Mrs. Fleming's hand in hers. Mrs. Fleming tried to take her hand back. "You shouldn't touch me, love. Don't know if it's catching." Mrs. Fleming coughed into a rag. Kathleen spotted the fresh blood. Still, she moved closer to the woman who had stood by her family when they needed help. She held Mrs. Fleming's hand tighter, wanting to erase the fear from her eyes. "What can I do for you?" Kathleen asked. "Why didn't you send for me?" "I thought I had more time. I didn't think it would take me so fast. My mam and Gran had it, but with them it took years. Kathleen, my children, will you make sure they are looked after? Dave will be able to cope with the elder boys, but he won't know how to deal with the young uns. The girls, they need a ma. They need—" "Shush now. The girls will be just fine, as will the rest of the family. We will look after them. Would you like some water?" Kathleen held Mrs. Fleming up so she could take a small sip of water. She couldn't believe how light the woman was. She had faded away to almost nothing. Why hadn't she come to see the Flemings a couple of weeks ago? She might have been able to do something for them. "Kathleen, can you ask—" The woman struggled to get the words out. It took every ounce of her strength to speak. "What is it?" "Ask Father Nelson to bury me in a decent grave. I have the money put by. I couldn't care less where they put me, but Dave, he will insist on it. Don't let him waste money, though. I don't need the best casket or any of the trimmings. Heaven don't care about those things, but my family does." Kathleen swallowed hard. Mrs. Fleming was being so brave. Kathleen nodded her head, not trusting herself to speak. "Kathleen, I think you best send them back in. Thank you." "Oh, Mrs. Fleming, after everything you did for my family, I wish there was something I could do for you." Kathleen whispered, her voice shaking with the effort to stop her tears. "There is. My girls." Kathleen shouted for Dave to come back, not wanting the woman to die without her family by her side. She pulled out of the way and left the little family to it. She had to go and tell Lily and Bella. Chapter 4. New York. Careful not to touch Lily for fear of carrying germs, she outlined what was happening. Lily paled, her hands going to her mouth. "Mrs. Fleming, why didn't she send us word when I didn't come last week? Why didn't she send for me again and tell me it was urgent? She said she thought she had more time. She is worried about her family. I said we would look after them." "Of course we will. Dave Fleming is a wonderful husband and father. He will be just fine with a little bit of help from his neighbours and us. I'm sure once people know, they will help too." Kathleen would have once agreed with Lily. When she lived here, neighbours tried to help each other. But times were even tougher now. There was less work and thus less money to go around. The people might have great intentions, but intentions couldn't make a dollar stretch further. When you were struggling to feed and keep a roof over your own family, charity wasn't something you could afford. They didn't have to wait long. The wails of the children told them their friend had passed on. "Tommy, take Lily home, please," Kathleen said. "This is no place for her." "What about you, Kathleen?" Lily asked, looking concerned. "I am fine. I will stay with the Flemings. Tommy can escort you home and Minnie Mike can go for Father Nelson. You heard what the doctor said, Lily. You need to be especially careful." "I will stay too. There might be something I can do," Bella said. Kathleen gave her a grateful look before turning back to Lily. Kathleen could see Lily was fighting the desire to protect her child with her need to be there for their friend. "Mrs. Fleming wouldn't want you to risk the babe. Go, I will be fine. I'll be back tomorrow." Kathleen took the basket of things from Minnie Mike and turned to go back into the Flemings' family. She took a second to say a quiet prayer for the woman who had done her best to shelter and protect the Collins family when they needed her. It was time for her to repay the favour by making sure her young ones were looked after. Twin girls looked up as Kathleen and Bella made their way inside. She hadn't noticed them before. Given their age, she assumed they were friends of Helen Fleming, Mrs. Fleming's youngest daughter. The twins were visibly upset. Kathleen bent down to greet them. "Girls, maybe you should go home. Mrs. Fleming has died, and her family needs time to say goodbye." "We don't got a home," one of the girls said. "Not anymore. We were staying here." Kathleen looked into the girl's eyes and saw she was telling the truth. The poor child looked scared to bits, but she was trying to be brave, holding her sister's hand tight. "I'm sorry, I didn't know that. My name is Kathleen Collins. Mrs. Fleming once looked after my family too." "She was a really nice lady. Pa said she would look after us. What's going to happen now?" Kathleen didn't know. She doubted Dave Fleming would be able to mind his own brood without worrying about extras. "I will check with Mr. Fleming, but for now why don't you sit down and have a cookie? They were baked today and are delicious." The girls rubbed their hands on their dresses before taking the cookies. "You go into your friends. I will stay with these girls," Bella said. "I don't want to go inside as I don't know the family." "Thanks, Bella," Kathleen whispered before she hurried into the room where the family sat around the bed. Mrs. Fleming would need to be laid out. She caught Colum Fleming's eye and motioned the lad over to her. They were of a similar age. "Colum, I am so sorry for your loss. Your ma was a good woman." "Thanks, Kathleen. I wish I'd known how bad she was, but she hid it." "Mothers are like that," Kathleen added softly, thinking of her own mam. "Colum, there are twin girls outside. They said they live here." "Aye, Megan and Eileen, Tom Doyle's 6-year-old young uns. Tom went blind in an accident down the mill years back. His missus left about a year after and took the baby with her. Nobody knows where she went. Ma took the twins in, as Tom couldn't handle them any more. He said he would come back with some money, but he never showed up." "So they've been abandoned?" Colm looked around to check that no one was listening. "Don't tell the priest, but rumour has it Mrs. Doyle done away with herself. Ma said Tom was sick with grief, said the girls would be better off here, but now Da won't be able to mind them too. You'll have to take them." "Me?" "To Lily Doherty. Your Bridget took a trainload of orphans away last year. The Doyle girls need a home." Kathleen thought of the two little ones outside, and her heart melted. 6 years old, and all they had was each other. "Sorry, Kathleen, but what else can we do?" Colm asked. "I can't mind them. I got a job on the railways. I was lucky after all the closures 'cause of the crash in shares. Da has his hands full there." "I know, Colm. Best of luck with the job. I will stay here, but Bella, my friend, will take the twins to Lily." "I miss you, Kathleen." His cheeks flushed as it hit him what he had said. "I mean, I miss all of you. Shane most of all. Tell him I said hello when you next hear from him." Kathleen found herself nodding. Colm gave her hand a gentle squeeze before taking his place back with his family. They were saying the prayers for the dead. Chapter 5. New York.
"Miss, what's going to happen to us?"
Bella looked down at the little girl, her arm wrapped around her sister, both faces smeared with cookies.
"I don't know. Megan, is it?"
she asked the one who had spoken. The girl nodded.
"My friend Kathleen will be back in a minute."
To her relief, Kathleen didn't take long inside the small room.
"Bella, can you take the twins back to the sanctuary? I need to stay here and help the family. I might be all night." "Are you sure I can't do anything to help you?"
Bella asked, despite not wanting to go inside. Dead bodies scared her.
"Thank you, but no. You take the girls. That's helping me. I will see you later."
The twins looked between Bella and Kathleen.
"We don't want to leave. We want to stay here. Our dad knows we are here. He said he'd come back."
Bella exchanged a quick look with Kathleen before kneeling, so she'd be on the same level as Megan.
"Megan, we can't stay here, as lots of people will come to say goodbye to Mrs. Fleming. I'm going to take you to where we live and give you some dinner. You can stay with us for a few nights, and if your dad comes, someone will tell him where you are."
"I'll tell him, Megan. You go on with these nice ladies. That's what Mam would have wanted you to do," a red-haired lad with freckles said.
"Thanks, Colm," Kathleen answered. "Can you go for the midwife for me, please? Someone needs to see to your mam."
The young man was gone before Bella could offer her condolences.
"That was Colm Fleming. He and my brother Shane were once best friends,"
Kathleen explained, before turning to go back into the room. Bella took the girls' hands and walked them slowly back to the sanctuary. Tommy came with them, despite her protests.
"Ain't safe for you to be walking the streets, Miss Bella, that's for sure,"
he mumbled. She didn't argue with him, but insisted he go back to wait for Kathleen once he had had something to eat. She didn't want anything to happen to her friend. The twins didn't seem hungry, so she took them upstairs where she gave them a bath and put them to bed. They wanted to share a bed, so she decided to give them the bed in her room. Eileen cried, but Megan didn't shed a tear, which worried Bella. She wondered how the twins had ended up with Mrs. Fleming.
"Please don't leave us. We don't like the dark,"
Megan said quietly.
"I won't leave you. I will sleep here on the floor,"
she promised. She told them a story until they fell asleep. She watched the two little innocent faces and wondered what life had in store for them now. Thankful Bella had taken the twins, Kathleen waited for the midwife. The same woman did the birthing and laying out of the dead. But Colm sent word to say she was at a birth, so she wouldn't be able to come till morning. Annoyed Colm didn't make an appearance, Kathleen wasn't sure what to do. She couldn't leave Mrs. Fleming. Even in death, the woman deserved her dignity. She would have been the first to ensure her body was decent when the priest arrived. So Kathleen boiled some water on the stove, and then she asked Dave Fleming to leave. They left Jess, Mrs. Fleming's 10-year-old, with Kathleen. Together they washed the woman down and changed her into a clean shift. They couldn't do anything about the bed, it being the only one in the house.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?